With the introduction of Scaletail as one of the villains of Mutant Island, Playmates decided to reissue his action figure. But as classic as the toy may feel, Scaletail is a character that has never appeared in other shows, and he was seldom used, often with another snake character taking his place. So who was Scaletail? Stay tuned and find out. Given what we know about the character's development, there was a precursor to this Scaletail. Scalian was a mutant alien snake designed by Peter Laird in 1988, intended to be made into an action figure. While we can't truly link this creation to Scaletail, this toy would have had similarities. For example, it would have been a snake inside a removable exosuit with mechanical limbs. Peter even suggested the snake be made of soft rubber, possibly to make it bendable. But it wasn't until 1990 that Scaletail began to take shape. He was initially pitched by Michael Dooney under the name of Cobrax the Destroyer. Like Peter's idea, Cobrax was a mutant alien. But some of the elements from the final figure were introduced here, like his armor and belt. However, this character had arms and legs of its own, a product of his mutation, and a tail with a spiked end. It's unclear why the character was shelved until 1992, but one could assume that it was for marketing reasons. You may have already figured out that Cobrax wasn't a memorable name. But it was just one possibility. Artists would usually pitch designs with several names to give Playmates options. However, the name Scaletail came from a different character. Dan Berger suggested it as a possible name for Merdude. Seeing the thematic connection with this other character, Playmates decided to use it on Cobrax. But, of course, Scaletail didn't look exactly like Cobrax, and that was when David Arshosky from Anaglyph Studios came in to pump up the weirdness. In his design, both of Scaletail's arms were going to be made of snakes. He'd have an articulated jaw, like Worm, and a popping tongue. His lower body would have been made of bendable soft rubber, as in Peter's proposal, and he would also have had a tire track on his tail, which would have been a really funny detail. By the time the figure was sculpted, he had 9 points of articulation, not counting his tongue, which didn't pop out but could be brought in and out by moving the bendable rubber hood. Interestingly, the figure had many references to ancient Egyptian symbology. This was very likely done to give him an international identity, something that wasn't unusual at all in 1992. Other figures in this theme released that year were Monty Moose, Hothead, King Lionheart, and Dr. L. Snakes were important characters in ancient Egypt, and while some of his body characteristics may remind you of the Indian snake, he was more likely modeled after Uraeus. This cobra was sculpted into pharaoh's crowns and royal symbols. There was even a goddess named Wadjet who acted as a guardian of the pharaoh. Another mythological creature was Apep, a giant serpent and enemy of the sun god Ra. As a centerpiece in his armor, Scaletail wears a scarab, a symbol that, among other things, represents transformation. A fitting symbol for a mutant. He also has a winged sun disk on his base, right where his peg hole is. This hole has 2 snakes emerging from it, which was also part of Egyptian iconography. Finally, Scaletail also had a symbol known as the spectacles in a couple of places, just to make sure kids don't miss that we're dealing with a snake character. Having said all that, it's up to you to figure out how a mutant alien from Dimension X would have all these Egyptian references. So what was the in-universe logic of this villain who liked eating mice, men, and mutants, and could technically swallow a Ninja Turtle whole? Well, he was known as the highest paid bounty hunter in Dimension X, with a very high success rate. Tired of dealing with the turtles himself, Krang hired Scaletail to get the job done. Did he succeed? Well, maybe. If you had the action figure and decided that was the story of the day. The figure came with 2 clip-on guns you could attach to his arm or tail. The scale shooter and the vicious venom pistol. This may have been too many guns, as he already had one sculpted at the end of his tail and was apparently operated by a small snake. But I guess it makes sense. What would be more dangerous than a snake? Perhaps a snake with 3 guns. However, we're not even done with his accessories. His main weapon was his tongue gun, which was connected to a belly-busting backpack that could be placed on his hood. We could assume that this backpack was filled with venom that Scaletail could shoot from his tongue. This is actually a take on nature's own spitting cobras, known for shooting venom up to 3 meters away, usually targeting their predator's eyes. By now, it should be super clear why Scaletail was so dangerous, but just in case you're not convinced, let's add electricity to the mix. Yes, he came with a wattage whip, an electrifying whip shaped like a rattlesnake. As I mentioned earlier, the character was barely used during Turtle Mania. He appeared in the Game Boy game Radical Rescue as a boss, where he looked exactly like the action figure. But he almost had a much bigger role that same year in a Super Nintendo game. Yes, he was almost a boss in TMNT Tournament Fighters. His design needed to be adapted to match the game's fighting style, so he would have had arms and legs. But other than that, he would have looked very similar to his toy design. The character was usually ignored in future adaptations, with others taking up the spot of a snake mutant. The closest it ever got was in the pages of TMNT Black, White, and Green, where a mutated snake took the shape of Scaletail. Having said that, this was a non-canon story, and the character wasn't named. As you already know, Scaletail was finally adapted for the 2nd season of Tales of the TMNT, where he was more of a not-so-bright template that could one day become the final Scaletail. To give fans enough Scaletail in their final year with the license, Playmates reissued the original action figure and will also release the Tails version in 2026. Since this was a themed classic pack, the figure came with Anthrax and Worm, who were also in the show. And since Toka and Razar had already been reissued, they added another fan favorite, Usagi Yojimbo. Scaletail came out at a time when secondary characters weren't selling as well as the Turtles, so Playmates was releasing fewer varieties of them. As a result, with all the competition with Turtle variants, Scaletail may have gone unnoticed on the shelves. Perhaps with a less pronounced nostalgia hook, the character inspired other creations or plot twists in shows and comics. To be fair, Rudolph Cabrado, another mutant snake from the same era, also didn't get any luckier. It might be something about snakes that makes them more niche. What are your thoughts or memories about this character? Do you think Scaletail was dangerous enough? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.